The moment of discovery was not a grand public announcement, but a terse, automated alert at 4:17 Universal Time, coordinated on July 1st, 2025. It originated from the Atlas HKO telescope in Haleakala, Hawaii. The coordinates were RA 16 hours, 21 minutes, and 3 seconds. Deck -19 ring operator to 14 foot, deep within the constellation of Scorpius. The object was immediately flagged as an unbound hyperbolic trajectory, designating it the third confirmed interstellar visitor to breach our solar system's gravitational frontier. It was designated 3I/Atlas. Unlike its volatile-rich predecessor, 2I/Borisov, and the baffling, inert 1I/Oumuamua, Atlas presented an immediate, unique, and deeply troubling contradiction. Initial spectroscopic analysis, cross-referenced with the VLT's FIRS-2 instrument, showed a coma, a vaporized cloud of material, proof of activity. Yet, the chemical signature of that coma defied terrestrial cometary physics. The expected emission lines of hydroxyl, OH, the signature of water dissociation, were muted, almost absent. Dominating the spectrum, instead, were overwhelming signals of neutral carbon dioxide, CO2, and, more startlingly, a trace signature of a complex, cyclical hydrocarbon with a mass-to-charge ratio of m/z equals 134.12 Da. This was the first cold hook. The most active interstellar object ever seen was not composed of water ice, and it was carrying molecules that had no established place in any known cometary catalog. Humanity had received a messenger, but its language was utterly alien. The ghost of 1I/Oumuamua still haunted the Celestial Mechanics Division at JPL. When that first interstellar wanderer was detected, the frenzy of speculation had been intense, fueled by non-gravitational acceleration and an unearthly, elongated shape that defied asteroidal or cometary classification. Harvard's Avi Loeb, seizing on the ambiguity, had proposed an alien light sail, igniting a media storm that ultimately left the scientific community defensive and scarred by what many termed premature sensationalism. The consensus had settled on a natural, if highly unusual, explanation, perhaps an exotic nitrogen iceberg or a shrapnel shard from a tidal disruption event. This history cast a heavy shadow over the initial reports of 3I/Atlas. The immediate, almost instinctive reaction from many established researchers was deep, almost hostile skepticism toward anything suggesting anomaly. "We will not repeat the Oumuamua error," became the unstated yet palpable protocol. However, Atlas was forcing the issue. Where Oumuamua had been frustratingly inert, revealing no discernible coma and no simple chemical fingerprints, Atlas was a fountain of activity. It was a functioning, outgassing comet, a fact that, paradoxically, made its chemical deviations even more unsettling. Its very activity provided the crucial data points that Oumuamua had withheld. The sheer volume of CO2 venting at such a distance from the Sun suggested a massive reservoir of highly volatile material, pointing to an origin in the frigid reaches beyond any known stellar snowline, a place of impossible, deep space cold. But it was the presence of the complex m/z equals 134.12 Da molecule, provisionally designated Atlas M1, that broke the narrative of a natural but unusual comet. Cometary comas are typically a messy collection of simple molecules: water, carbon monoxide, methanol. They are the pristine, frozen remnants of the solar system's formation. Atlas M1 was not simple. Its molecular weight and spectral characteristics suggested a highly stable, aromatic structure, a complex architecture that implied formation under extreme pressure or highly specialized chemical processing. Dr. Alara Vance, lead spectroscopist at the Keck Observatory, described the finding in a private memo as a chemical inconsistency that collapses our current model of interstellar ice formation. She noted that the structure required synthesis pathways that are either unknown to cosmic chemistry or that demand an entirely new evolutionary model for cometary material. The object was active, it was a comet, but its volatile composition was screaming a different story. A story of formation in a deep, cold, chemically sophisticated environment that seemed less like a cloud of cosmic dust and more like a carefully maintained laboratory. This combination of activity and uniqueness prevented the dismissive protocol of the past from taking hold. The sheer volume of hard data streaming in from the Hubble and JWST demanded attention. Atlas could not be ignored as a statistical fluke. It was a phenomenon broadcasting its exotic nature. The question ceased to be if Atlas was different, but why it was carrying the chemical secrets of a place entirely foreign to our own solar system. This time, the scientific community had to engage with the anomaly, even if the eventual explanation would shatter their comfort zone. The sheer volume of hard data streaming in from the Hubble and JWST demanded immediate attention, forcing the most cautious researchers to confront the possibility that this interstellar visitor was not merely unusual, but potentially revolutionary. Its comet-like behavior was the mask. Its interior chemistry was the mystery. The debate was no longer about a statistical fluke, but about a chemical fingerprint that defied the very definition of a comet as understood for the last 50 years. This time, the scientific community had to engage with the anomaly, even if the eventual explanation would shatter their comfort zone. The third anomaly was a deep wound in the established body of cometary knowledge, a stark chemical inconsistency that threatened to upend decades of consensus. Analysis by the JWST's MIRI instrument, operating in the mid-infrared, confirmed the startling CO2 dominance, an astonishing ratio of 8.5 to 1 in favor of carbon dioxide over water ice, a complete inversion of the standard H2O-dominated profile seen in nearly all solar system comets. This confirmed the object's origin in regions of extreme, perhaps interstellar, cold where CO2 could condense preferentially. Yet, the deep space origin was only the starting point for the chemical enigma. The Keck data, now corroborated by VLT's UV spectrograph, refined the identification of the complex molecule, Atlas M1. Its spectral lines pointed toward an extremely stable, heterocyclic compound, possibly a methylated derivative of pyrimidine or a similar nitrogen-containing ring structure. The significance was immediate and unsettling. Pyrimidines are foundational components of biological information systems. They form the core of DNA and RNA bases. To find such a complex, prebiotic architect within a comet was not unprecedented. Simple amino acids have been found before, but to find this specific, robust compound in such a relative abundance, and so far from the Sun, was revolutionary. Dr. Vance, in a now widely circulated but still unreleased internal report labeled Project Chimera Gamma, summarized the finding. The abundance of Atlas M1 and its structural complexity fundamentally challenged the current model of non-directed abiotic synthesis in dense molecular clouds. Its presence suggests a formation pathway involving selective energy input or catalysis, processes not typically ascribed to cometary creation. The chemistry reads less like a random cosmic slurry and more like a precursor library. This particular data set, the dominant CO2 combined with the complex Atlas M1, established a dramatic contrast. Comets are chemically primitive. They're defined by their pristine, unprocessed nature. The materials detected in Atlas, however, showed signs of chemical maturity. It suggested either an unprecedented natural chemical evolution over astronomical timescales, a cosmic cooking process, or something far more unsettling. If this object represented a naturally formed comet, then the interstellar medium was infinitely more chemically sophisticated than predicted, capable of forging the very building blocks of life in vast, deep space chemical laboratories. If, however, the object was not entirely natural, the Atlas M1 became a deliberate signpost, a chemically engineered calling card. The dilemma was further compounded by the analysis of trace metals. While nickel emission lines were detected, a hallmark of many comets, The expected corresponding iron and silicon signatures were anomalously weak. Loeb supporters seized on this data gap, arguing that the selective presence of certain metals and the suppression of others could indicate industrial-level refinement, processed alloys masked by the surrounding cometary dust. The mainstream pushback was swift, citing issues of excitation conditions, that is, the energy levels required to make an atom glow in the spectrum. They argued that iron atoms simply weren't being excited at the current distance from the sun. But the nagging inconsistency remained. The object displayed activity that was simultaneously primitive, CO2 gas, and highly evolved, Atlas M1. Complexity. It was a dichotomy that fueled the growing internal division within the astronomical community, forcing some experts to contemplate the unnerving possibility that the object was a composite, a core of sophisticated material intentionally shrouded in a conventional, but CO2-rich cometary camouflage. The narrative shifted from classifying an unusual comet to decoding a celestial puzzle that used the language of chemistry to hide its true intent. The detection of Atlas M1 served as the seismic trigger, shifting the scientific narrative from mere curiosity to existential contemplation. The complexity of the molecule, a precursor to fundamental biological structures, did not merely suggest exotic chemistry. It suggested a mechanism of chemical synthesis far more efficient, or perhaps far more directed, than any spontaneous process modeled in the cold depths of a molecular cloud. Dr. Kenji Ishimura, a planetary biologist at MIT specializing in abiogenesis, argued that the finding was a potential game-changer. We are not just seeing building blocks. We are seeing architectural templates. The concentration and stability of this specific structure hint at a highly optimized chemical pathway. It is the chemical signature of life, or at least the perfect chemical cradle for it. This interpretation propelled the conversation directly into the realm of panspermia. The classic hypothesis suggests that life or its components travel between planetary systems, often encapsulated within meteoroids ejected by impact. However, 3I/Atlas presented a far more elegant, intentional, and potentially terrifying delivery system. If the object was indeed a planet seed, as hypothesized by Suzanne Falsner, then it was a seed carrying not just the inert, rocky core, but the biological DNA of worlds yet unborn. This led to a crucial and highly dramatic internal distinction. Was Atlas a vessel of panspermia, random transport, or directed panspermia, intentional seeding? The difference was intelligence. The presence of Atlas M1 complicated the debate. If the molecule was a natural product of a unique interstellar environment, it proved that the universe was teeming with the necessary molecular complexity for life's immediate genesis upon encountering liquid water, a massive boost for the probability of spontaneous biogenesis. But if the molecule was introduced, or if the comet itself was a highly efficient, deep-freeze biological repository, the implications were staggering. It meant that life, or its fundamental instructions, had actively crossed the interstellar void, designed to survive the deep space radiation and the thermal cycling of stellar encounters, awaiting a specific, fertile harbor. The emotional response within the teams monitoring the data was complex. There was the sheer exhilaration of discovery, the potential for an undeniable link between cometary material and the very origin of life on Earth. But there was also a pervasive, creeping sense of dread. If the conditions for life were being delivered from outside, it reduced Earth's biological history from a unique, miraculous event to a simple, predetermined recipient. We are looking at materials that could be the missing link between inert cosmic dust and the creation of worlds, stated a redacted NASA memo obtained through a FOIA request filed by a consortium of academic journalists. The report continued with a phrase that sent chills through the community. If this object is a natural phenomenon, it means the galaxy is a much warmer, more biologically active place than we imagined. If it is artificial, it means the gardener has arrived. The philosophical stakes were now astronomically high. The key was to find a corroborating signature. If Atlas was a biological courier, the Atlas M1 molecule should be accompanied by other molecules associated with metabolic processes or cellular integrity. The JWST was urgently retasked to hunt for signatures of phosphates and specific chiral handedness, imbalances in the complex organic molecules, the ultimate indicators of biology. Until those definitive signs were found, the anomaly remained a potent, unsettling chemical clue, threatening to redefine the genesis of life not just on Earth, but across the galaxy, solidifying the idea that Atlas was a celestial seed primed to germinate. The core definition of a comet's activity rests on its volatility profile, the distance from the Sun at which frozen materials begin to sublimate, creating the characteristic coma. 43I/Atlas. This profile was the fifth critical inconsistency, providing a stark counter-narrative to the object's CO2 dominance. Standard solar system comets, dominated by water ice, typically turn on around 3.0 astronomical units (EU) from the Sun, where solar heating is sufficient to vaporize H2O. Atlas, however, showed significant, measurable activity much earlier. The first definitive detection of hydroxyl OH emissions, the result of water vapor dissociation by solar UV, occurred at an astonishing $3.50, far beyond the traditional water snowline. This early awakening defied conventional thermal physics for several reasons. If the nucleus was primarily CO2, a much more volatile substance than water, the object should have begun venting CO2 first, followed by water vapor much closer to the Sun. Instead, the small, measurable OH spike preceded the massive CO2 surge. This suggested that a small, highly exposed reservoir of water ice was activating prematurely. Mainstream astrophysicists offered a standard explanation. Atlas likely possessed an extremely porous, fluffy structure, allowing the slight, diffuse warmth of the distant Sun to penetrate deep into the nucleus, causing buried ice pockets to sublimate earlier than expected. This porosity hypothesis was a solid, if conventional, argument against extraordinary claims. However, Dr. Vance's team, utilizing a complex thermal model known as Chimera delta, noted a critical flaw in this reasoning. If the outgassing was driven by deep porosity, the resulting jets should be diffuse and directionally chaotic. Instead, high-resolution imaging from the Hubble Space Telescope, HST, operating at the F550M filter band, revealed that the early OH activity originated from a tight, single-point emission vent on the Sun-facing hemisphere. This jet was focused, structured, and maintained a constant, non-precessing alignment relative to the nucleus's rotational axis, a level of stability highly unusual for passive, porous sublimation. The thermal gradient required to produce that focused jet at $3.50 would imply a water ice reservoir less than 1 meter below the surface, but the rest of a nucleus is clearly shielded, stated the Chimera delta report. The object is venting in a highly controlled manner, not exploding chaotically. The VLT's sphere instrument then compounded the mystery by performing detailed polarimetry on the early coma. Polarization analysis examines how light is scattered by dust grains and gas molecules, providing insights into their size, shape, and composition. The results were immediate. The dust grains being ejected during this early phase were highly uniform in size, exhibiting a scattering profile inconsistent with collisional fragments. They were almost monodisperse, a characteristic common in industrial milling processes, but virtually unknown in the natural, chaotic environment of a cometary coma. The combined evidence, the OH spike at an impossible distance, the single point, stable jet, and the monodispersed dust, introduced an element of agency. While each piece of data could be explained away by extreme porosity, exotic materials, or a fortunate alignment, the three anomalies occurring simultaneously created an improbable convergence. The volatile profile did not read like a natural, passive reaction to solar heating. It read like a controlled release. If Atlas was a seed, this early, focused venting was its deliberate shedding of a protective outer layer, a finely calibrated maneuver to adjust its mass-to-volume ratio or to disperse a specific, uniform material into the solar environment. The implication, quietly discussed in secure channels, was that the object was exhibiting a form of attitude control disguised as a comet's natural awakening, an unnerving thought that necessitated the immediate shift of strategic resources toward the object. The passive observation phase was over. The active assessment had begun. The confluence of chemical maturity, the prebiotic signatures of Atlas, M1, and the bizarre, controlled volatile release at $3.50 led directly to the most radical working hypothesis. That 3I/Atlas was the missing link, a celestial vehicle bridging the inert cosmos and the genesis of planetary life. This concept transcended simple panspermia, evolving into the theory of directed cosmic seeding. The central premise, largely championed by the SETI community and gaining grudging traction among planetary scientists, posited that Atlas was not a random fragment, but a sophisticated, biologically engineered planet seed. This seed was designed to fulfill multiple, sequential roles upon entering a young stellar system. Role 1. Chemical stabilizer. Its dominant CO2 composition served as an enormous deep freeze, maintaining the integrity of the fragile, complex organic molecules like Atlas, M1 against the ravages of interstellar radiation and thermal extremes. CO2 is an excellent shield, chemically stable and abundant, forming the perfect, expendable cryogenic shell. Role 2. Attitude controller. The early, focused OH jet at $3.50 was not an accident, but a precise, low-thrust maneuver. By venting a small, accessible pocket of water ice, the object could achieve minute course corrections, modifying its orbital period or inclination to optimize its upcoming encounters with key planetary gravitational wells. This cosmic micromanagement ensured that the seed would remain in the system for the maximum possible time, maximizing its capture probability by a gas giant. Role 3. Biological incubator. The core of the hypothesis focused on the object's potential to generate the conditions for life itself during its transit. The enormous pressure generated by the vast, deep layer of CO2 ice, coupled with heat generated by the slow decay of radioactive isotopes within the rock and mineral nucleus, could create transient, high-pressure liquid CO2 or even high-salinity liquid water pockets deep inside. These isolated microenvironments, protected from the void, could serve as biological refuges or, more profoundly, genesis points for the Atlas M1 to react with trace elements. This allowed for slow, protected prebiotic evolution to occur inside the comet, essentially turning the celestial body into a self-contained, traveling laboratory. This model provided an elegant, unified explanation for all the observed anomalies. The exotic chemistry was the cargo. The early volatility was the navigation system. The trajectory alignment was the mission plan. If this was true, the implications were not just astronomical, but teleological. The universe was not simply random. It was being tended. The key supporting evidence, subtly leaking out of the NASA data centers, was the composition of the monodispersed dust grains ejected during the early OH venting. Analysis showed these uniform particles were not common silicates, but an unusual, high-purity amorphous carbon. This prompted a chilling interpretation. The shedding of this carbon was a deliberate act of seeding the inner solar system with highly specialized, chemically active carbon dust, a form of molecular fertilizer. This was the moment the language within the secure research teams irrevocably shifted. Terms like comet and anomaly were replaced by courier, payload, and the Genesis protocol. The question was no longer about distinguishing rock from ice, but about distinguishing natural complexity from deliberate engineering. If a civilization or a purely biological mechanism had perfected the technique of seeding a star system, we had just witnessed the initiation of a fundamental cosmic process. The philosophical gravity of this realization, that humanity might have just become witness to the quiet creation, or at least the chemical preparation, of a neighboring world, demanded an immediate, coordinated, and covert operational response. The time for open academic debate was quickly yielding to the urgency of secure, military-grade intelligence gathering. The growing technical certainty that 3I/Atlas represented something far beyond a typical comet triggered an unprecedented institutional response within the world's major space agencies. Officially, the observation campaign was labeled Project Atlas Interstellar Response, or AIR. Subtly, but with maximum security clearance, it was codified by the National Security Space Office as Protocol Valkyrie. The core objective of Valkyrie was dual. First, to acquire absolute, irrefutable evidence of non-natural phenomena. Second, to manage and restrict the dissemination of any data suggesting artificiality, preventing the kind of Oumuamua debacle that could destabilize public and political discourse. The technical response was immediate and focused on resource reallocation. The James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, already providing invaluable spectroscopic data, had its schedule cleared of all secondary targets for a continuous, 18-week monitoring block, a move requiring direct intervention from the highest levels of the U.S. and European science boards. This continuous monitoring focused on the MIRI and NIR-SPEC instruments, searching for the telltale spectral lines of complex phosphates or heavy chiral imbalances, the ultimate biological smoking guns. The most crucial directive under Protocol Valkyrie involved the immediate retasking of existing inner solar system assets. The Mars Express, MEX, and ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, TGO, already in Mars orbit, were given new, high-priority orbital maneuver protocols. Their mission changed from studying the Martian atmosphere to acting as rapid response, forward-deployed reconnaissance platforms. The goal was to use their high-resolution cameras, HRSC on MEX and CASIS on TGO, to capture the nucleus of Atlas during its closest approach to Mars, the 30 million kilometer passage on October 3rd, providing imaging resolution impossible from Earth. This phase was designated isolated access. The raw data from the MEX/TGO encounter was immediately routed not to the public ESA archive, but to a highly restricted, classified server at JPL's Deep Space Network facility, designated Site Cerberus. The operational philosophy shifted from open data sharing to data partitioning. Only small, carefully selected subsets of the spectroscopic data, those supporting the exotic but natural comet narrative, were allowed into the public domain. Anything that could be interpreted as a non-gravitational maneuver, a structured emission, or a clear biological signature was sequestered. To bolster this defense against transparency, a parallel disinformation protocol was initiated. A high volume of complex, highly technical papers, all supporting the natural origin thesis, focused on extreme porosity, chaotic fragmentation, and statistical probability, was commissioned and pushed through the academic peer review pipeline. These papers served as a firewall, providing plausible, scholarly counter-explanations for every anomaly that might leak out. The sense of urgency was driven by the object's sheer velocity, 26 kilometers per second relative to the Sun, which meant the window for high-resolution analysis was short. The Juno probe, currently orbiting Jupiter, was assessed for a radical, last-minute trajectory change to allow a distant flyby during Atlas's March 2026 Jovian encounter. However, the risk to the primary mission was deemed too high, illustrating the intense conflict between current scientific mandate and the existential need for reconnaissance. Protocol Valkyrie became the operational signature of the growing dread. The scientific community was now working under the assumption that a major, potentially world-altering event was unfolding in their own backyard, and their immediate, primary directive was to ensure that the public, and most of their own colleagues, remained completely unaware of the true gravity of the situation. The search for this smoking gun was now a classified military intelligence operation masquerading as a high-level astronomical campaign. The astronomical community's self-imposed constraint, the avoidance of the Oumuamua mistake, could not silence Professor Abraham Loeb. The physicist, operating outside the protocol Valkyrie restrictions and enjoying a massive public platform, provided the most forceful and mathematically rigorous counterargument to the natural origin firewall. For Loeb and his small, highly vocal team, the smoking gun was not chemistry, but kinematics, the object's path. He focused intensely on the concept of the cosmic itinerary. Most interstellar objects, by definition, arrive from random directions, reflecting the chaotic gravitational interactions of stellar systems across the galaxy. Their trajectories are highly erratic, often inclined far off the plane of our solar system. The ecliptic 3I/Atlas, however, arrived with an inclination of only 5.5 ring operator off the ecliptic, a deviation so minor that it appeared almost domesticated by comparison. The probability of an interstellar object arriving with such a tight alignment, purely by chance, was calculated by Loeb's team as p is almost equal to 0.005%. While this low probability did not constitute proof of artificiality, it was, in the language of statistics, an extreme outlier demanding non-trivial explanation. Loeb then layered this alignment with the observed sequence of close planetary encounters: Mars, then Venus at a slightly greater distance, then the remote vicinity of Earth, and finally, Jupiter. He argued that this was not a random flyby sequence, but a deliberate reconnaissance sequence, a cosmic itinerary crafted by patient, intelligent design. This trajectory reads like a flight plan, not a casualty of gravitational chaos, Loeb stated in a preprint article, instantly igniting public attention and causing major headaches for the Protocol Valkyrie team. The object's close passage to Mars on October 3rd and its subsequent geometry relative to the inner planets appeared to maximize observation opportunities of key worlds while minimizing the energy required for the probe to travel between them. The most compelling piece of kinematic evidence for Loeb was the timing of the object's perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun. This was scheduled for October 29th, placing 3I/Atlas almost perfectly behind the Sun relative to Earth. This alignment provided minimal Earth-based observation time during the critical phase of maximum activity and heat exposure. Loeb argued that this concealment was intentional, a tactical decision by an advanced probe to minimize surveillance while maximizing data collection under solar power. Mainstream physicists quickly rebutted, invoking the statistical cherry-picking argument. They claimed that when dealing with a sample size of only 3 objects, any specific trajectory would appear statistically improbable. Furthermore, they pointed out that no detectable, non-gravitational acceleration had been observed that could not be accounted for by the known sublimation of CO2. The trajectory, while unusual, remained purely gravitational in nature. Yet, the pendulum effect was now firmly established. The confidence in the natural comet hypothesis, driven by the vast CO2 reservoir, was counterbalanced by the growing unease about the anomalies. Loeb's mathematical argument, though contested, forced the official air program to dedicate significant resources to a minute reanalysis of the object's trajectory. If any small residual acceleration, even 10-13O/day2, could be isolated from the CO2 outgassing model, it would shatter the natural origin firewall. The intense scrutiny of the object's path became the proxy war between the naturalists and the artificialists. The JPL's internal reports began to categorize data into Group N, natural, and Group A, anomalous/artificial, recognizing that the boundary between the two was rapidly dissolving under the pressure of the cosmic itinerary. The question posed by Loeb was hauntingly simple. Why would a random chunk of deep space ice fly a trajectory that looked so much like a map? The moment the official narrative began to buckle under. The weight of the accumulated anomalies occurred following the analysis of the Very Large Telescope, VLT, data collected during a 3-hour window on the night of September 14th. This window, designated Observation Block 44 Tau, yielded the most startling spectroscopic inconsistency yet. The VLT's FIRS-2 instrument, operating in the visual and near-ultraviolet range, detected an extremely faint, almost vanishing emission line at 266.04 nanometers, a wavelength that did not correspond to any common molecule or atomic species known to exist in cometary ices or dust. Furthermore, the signal was transient. It appeared for approximately 42 minutes, then vanished, all while the primary C, O2, and Atlas M1 signals remained constant. This ephemeral emission was instantly labeled the 266 anomaly. Internal analysis suggested the 266 anomaly was a byproduct of an extremely rare, high-energy chemical reaction involving nitrogen and complex carbonyl compounds, a process that would require a sudden, localized energy input far exceeding what the distant sun could provide. It was the first true observational signature that could not be easily dismissed by the porosity or excitation condition firewall. The energy source had to be internal. The immediate institutional response was not the release of a paper, but a sudden, pronounced silence from the primary American agencies. Within 48 hours of Block 44, Tao's conclusion, NASA and JPL abruptly ceased all public-facing data updates on 3I/Atlas. Scheduled press briefings were postponed indefinitely. The public-facing JPL website's telemetry page for Atlas, which had previously displayed near real-time velocity and position data, was replaced with a static graphic and a single phrase: ongoing analysis and instrument calibration. This was a radical break from the established protocol of rapid dissemination that had defined the initial weeks of the air campaign. The silence was the smoking gun for those working under Protocol Valkyrie. It signaled that the agencies had crossed an internal threshold, that the probability of an artificial or biologically directed origin had surpassed a critical, predetermined level, triggering the full activation of the Information Containment Mandate. The VLT team, an ESA asset, was the source of the data, but the JPL controlled the major JWSD and HSD assets. The cessation of data sharing created an immediate, acrimonious rift between the European and American teams, a situation immediately exploited by the Valkyrie directors to justify data partitioning. The official line, pushed hard into the academic sphere, was that the 266 anomaly was simply instrument noise or a cosmic ray strike, despite the fact that the VLT team had triple redundant confirmation. The deliberate suppression of the 266 anomaly was directly linked to one of the most unsettling additional bytes provided by the VLT, an associated, highly localized temperature spike of 35 K above the expected blackbody temperature, isolated precisely at the point of the transient emission. This was the thermal signature of an internal energy release, not passive solar heating. The suppressed evidence led to an immediate crisis of confidence within the research community. Astronomers who were previously committed to the natural hypothesis began to question the integrity of the data stream. The public data archive for the HSD images, for example, contained notable time gaps, periods during which the telescope was supposedly observing, but from which no raw data was ever released. The Protocol Valkyrie response had unintentionally strengthened the hands of the very people it sought to discredit. Loeb's team immediately interpreted the NASA silence not as a sign of confusion, but as tacit confirmation of an artificial origin. When the data stops flowing, it means the data has become too important to share, Loeb commented, the message instantly echoing through global media. The sudden institutional shutdown provided the final, dramatic evidence that the object was not merely an anomaly, but a secret. The search for the smoking gun was now inextricably linked with the search for the motive for concealment. The accumulation of inconsistencies surrounding 3I/Atlas had now reached a critical mass, transforming the object from a simple scientific curiosity into a crisis of interpretation. The individual anomalies, once isolated and dismissible, now synthesized into a coherent, deeply troubling pattern, a convergence of physical, chemical, and kinematic contradictions that defied all traditional models. This was the moment the Group A anomalous/artificial data set officially overwhelmed the group in natural explanations within the secure site Cerberus facility. The synthesis of anomalies was cataloged as follows: kinematic inconsistency, the low orbital inclination, 5.5 ring operator off the ecliptic, and the precise sequence of planetary encounters, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, which statistically represented a flight plan, not a random trajectory. This provided the intentionality framework. Chemical inconsistency, the dominant 8.5 to 1 ratio of CO2 over H2O, an inversion of cometary norms, combined with the detection of Atlas M1, a complex heterocyclic aromatic compound with direct ties to prebiotic chemistry. This provided the payload and biological context. Volatile inconsistency, the focused, single-point OH jet occurring at an improbable $3.50, accompanied by the shedding of monodisperse, high-purity amorphous carbon grains. This suggested attitude control and a deliberate seeding mechanism. Energy inconsistency, the transient 266 anomaly emission coupled with a localized 35 K thermal spike detected by the VLT during observation block 44 tau. This provided the crucial signature of an internal energy release, a technological power source, or a highly efficient, regulated biological process. No single natural mechanism, not porosity, not chaotic fragmentation, not excitation conditions, could plausibly account for the confluence of all four signatures. To accept the natural origin hypothesis, one was forced to accept a series of extreme statistical improbabilities occurring simultaneously on a single object, an object that randomly chose a low-inclination, reconnaissance-like trajectory, that randomly developed an inversion of normalized chemistry, that randomly synthesized a complex prebiotic molecule with unprecedented abundance, and that randomly exhibited a transient internal thermal event. The resulting pattern was too perfect, too integrated. It suggested not chaos, but design. The logical conclusion, now adopted by the Protocol Valkyrie leadership, was that 3I/Atlas represented a phenomenon that utilized the mask of natural comet physics to achieve artificial or directed biological ends. The object was a techno-biological courier, its cometary activity acting as a sophisticated form of active camouflage. The core message of the 3I/Atlas investigation, therefore, extends beyond the fate of one visitor. It delivers three profound, actionable lessons for humanity. Lesson 1. The end of cosmic isolation. The robust evidence for directed cosmic seeding suggests that our galaxy is not composed of isolated stellar islands, but operates as a chemically and potentially biologically interconnected network. This mandates an immediate shift in the search for life, focusing not just on remote exoplanets, but on the interstellar medium itself, recognizing that panspermia is a predictable, managed cosmic process. Lesson 2. The limits of conventional physics. Atlas demonstrates that phenomena on the scale of interstellar transit may be utilizing physics or chemical processes far beyond the current scope of human engineering. It forces the scientific community to shed the self-limiting skepticism born from past errors and to engage with the possibility of systems that seamlessly blend technology and biology, a fusion we term living technology. Lesson 3. The imperative for data integrity. The NASA silence and the selective release of public data highlight the critical need for a globally agreed-upon disclosure protocol. When faced with evidence of existential consequence, the temptation to partition and conceal data threatens the very foundation of the scientific method. The integrity of the process must be held as important as the discovery itself. Humanity cannot afford to have its understanding of the universe managed through classified channels. The investigation into 3I/Atlas is not over. It is just entering its most critical phase. The next observation window, the closest pass to Mars, will provide the first truly isolated access data, potentially revealing the nucleus's composition with sufficient resolution to settle the debate. Until then, The silence from the agencies is the loudest confirmation that the missing link between comets and the creation of worlds may have, in fact, already arrived. The closest approach of 3I/Atlas to Mars, designated Event Red Line, occurred precisely at 6:42 Universal Time, coordinated on October 3, 2025. The distance was a mere 30.1 million kilometers, close enough for the two primary ESA assets, the Mars Express, MEX, and the ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, TGO, to execute the highly sensitive isolated access protocols mandated by Protocol Valkyrie. The data derived from this close encounter was paramount, offering spatial resolution on the nucleus and its immediate environment that was 50 times greater than any previous Earth-based observation. MEX's high-resolution stereo camera, HRSC, was tasked with an ultra-short exposure, multi-filter sequence aimed at resolving the nucleus shape and surface features, searching specifically for the highly controversial, elongated or flattened geometry that had plagued the Oumuamua debate. The data, however, immediately presented a contradictory result that only deepened the mystery. The nucleus appeared roughly spherical, dissipating the alien megastructure claims that hinged on an unnaturally flat shape. Yet, the HRSC image, processed through a high-pass filter, revealed an intense, persistent localized brightness emanating from a region near the object's rotational pole. This was not the transient glow of the 266 anomaly, but a steady, regulated emission of light, a stable 550 nanometers optical signature that suggested a continuous, low-level power source. The TGO's role was to perform spectroscopic analysis of the deep coma using its NOMAD instrument, specifically targeting trace gases that might leak from the active region. The initial data dump, consisting of 1.2 terabytes of raw telemetry, was immediately rerouted to Site Cerberus. The analysis revealed the expected CO2 and Atlas M1 signatures, but also provided the first definitive confirmation of a significant, measurable quantity of phosphine, pH3. Phosphine is a highly reactive and chemically unstable molecule on cosmic timescales. Its persistence requires a continuous or recent synthesis mechanism. While its presence can be explained by deep space, high-pressure chemistry, its detection in this specific context, coupled with Atlas M1, was immediately flagged as a high-confidence biological proxy. The most unnerving data, however, came from the MEX-Marcy's radar, an instrument designed to sound the Martian subsurface. In a highly experimental maneuver, Marcy's was used as a synthetic aperture radar to briefly penetrate the upper layers of the cometary coma, attempting to map the nucleus's interior structure. The data yielded a fragmented, low-signal return, but the processing team managed to isolate a faint subsurface reflection at a depth estimated to be approximately 800 meters beneath the cometary surface. The reflection indicated a boundary between two materials of highly divergent dielectric constants. This suggested a core region shielded by the outer CO2 mantle, potentially housing a significant high-density component. Crucially, the reflection was not a chaotic scattering pattern, which would be expected from a porous, rubble pile nucleus, but a structured, almost laminar reflection profile. The team dubbed this the subsurface shell anomaly. The data from the MEX/TGO close encounter, therefore, provided three new, critical pillars for the artificial/biological hypothesis: a stable, localized optical emission, power source, the presence of phosphine, biological proxy, and a structured subsurface shell, engineered core. The Protocol Valkyrie containment mandate instantly ratcheted up. The only information publicly released was a single, heavily processed HRSC image showing the coma's diffuse outline, an image specifically chosen because it obscured the localized polar brightness. The data had moved definitively beyond mere anomaly. It now suggested a sealed, power-regulated, chemically active internal system, safely nested beneath a thick, insulating CO2 shield precisely awaiting its next, critical orbital maneuver. The analysis of the isotopic ratios, often referred to as the cosmic fingerprints, became the next critical frontier in the 3I/Atlas investigation, offering a chemical window not just into the object's present state, but into its genesis. The JWST's NIR spec instrument was tasked with precision measurements of the deuterium to hydrogen D/H ratio within the trace amounts of water vapor detected in the coma. This ratio is arguably the most powerful diagnostic tool for planetary science. In simple terms, the colder the environment where water ice forms, the higher the concentration of the heavier isotope, deuterium D. Solar system comets, formed in the outer reaches of our Sun's protoplanetary disk, exhibit a D/H ratio roughly 2 to 3 times higher than Earth's ocean water. The measurement from 3I/Atlas shattered this expectation. The D/H ratio was initially flagged by the NIR spec team as a level 5 isotopic inconsistency. The ratio was found to be exceptionally low, nearly identical to that of Earth's oceans and terrestrial atmosphere. This was an utterly impossible result for any object formed in the deep interstellar cold required to condense the enormous quantity of CO2 observed. If the object was born in an environment cold enough to be CO2 dominant, its water component should have been highly enriched in deuterium. The low D/H ratio suggested, paradoxically, that the water ice was formed in a relatively warm, chemically mature environment, possibly one similar to the inner region of a protoplanetary disk, or even inside an existing, water-rich planetary body. The scientific dichotomy was now absolute. The CO2 shield screamed deep interstellar cold, while the water core whispered inner system warmth. Protocol Valkyrie immediately seized on this data. The public narrative, quickly disseminated through the officially approved natural origin papers, argued that the low D/H ratio indicated the water was not original ice, but the result of later, high-temperature processing, perhaps a brief, violent stellar encounter near its birth star, which could have chemically erased the deuterium signature. This was the thermal processing firewall. However, the Chimera Gamma team provided a classified, alternative interpretation. The low D/H ratio was not a feature of its formation, but a feature of its payload. If 3I/Atlas was a planet seed, the water it carried would be intentionally low in deuterium, the ideal isotopic composition for seeding a planet capable of supporting life as we know it. Terrestrial life is heavily reliant on water with a low D/H ratio. If a cosmic gardener were engineering a seed, they would ensure the water payload possessed the optimal isotopic signature for eventual planetary integration, rather than the chaotic, high-deuterium water of a random comet. This theory suggested that the water was not a pristine remnant of the birth cloud, but a highly refined, manufactured component. The isotopic data was further complicated by the analysis of the carbon-13 to carbon-12, C13/C12, ratio within the CO2 gas. Cometary C13/C12 ratios are generally consistent with the average interstellar medium. Atlas's ratio, however, showed a slight but statistically significant enrichment in C12. In biology, metabolic processes preferentially select the lighter C12 isotope. This slight enrichment in the lighter carbon was a recognized, though not definitive, biosignature, a tiny fingerprint pointing towards biological processing of the carbon compounds, even if they were now encased in ice. The cumulative isotopic evidence created an impossible profile, a body too cold to form water with a low D/H ratio, yet possessing exactly that ratio, coupled with a subtle carbon signature suggestive of biological interaction. It was the ultimate statement of non-randomness. The object carried the isotopic fingerprint of life's ideal environment, raising the terrifying question: had humanity just discovered a celestial body that was not only carrying the seeds of life, but carrying water that had been explicitly tuned for life? The mounting contradictions in chemistry and kinematics, the low D/H ratio, the CO2 shield, the improbable trajectory, demanded a search for the nucleus itself, the rumored subsurface shell anomaly hinted at by the MEX radar. Yet, the persistent opaque coma made optical imaging of the solid core impossible. The solution lay in pushing the limits of the Atacama Large Millimeter/Submillimeter Array, ALMA, an instrument designed to capture high-resolution images of cold gas and dust structures. By observing 3I/Atlas at specific submillimeter wavelengths, 850 GHz, that could penetrate the dense CO2 cloud, the ALMA team hoped to map the dust's thermal profile. What they found, during a grueling 40-hour observation block, was not the chaotic thermal signature of an inert core, but the unmistakable effect of an adjacent, non-cometary structure. The primary thermal image showed the nucleus as expected, a cold, dark mass. But the differential image, produced by subtracting the expected cometary outgassing model from the raw data, revealed an entirely new feature: a tiny, high-density, millimeter wave structure suspended approximately 2 kilometers from the nucleus's rotational pole, precisely where the mechs had detected the stable, low-level optical emission. This structure exhibited an astonishingly high blackbody temperature, 350 K, indicating an internal heat source, yet produced no detectable CO2 or H2O spectral lines. It was hot, inert, and impossibly stable. The object was immediately designated the companion structure, or, more dramatically in internal memos, the probe effect. The ALMA team, led by Dr. Anya Sharma, was unequivocal. This is not dust. Dust clouds at this distance and temperature would be vaporizing instantly, leaving a thermal trail. This structure is in thermal equilibrium, yet its size, 1.5 meters, and its lack of spectral activity suggest a highly robust, non-volatile material. The companion structure was locked in a stable, orbital dance with the main nucleus, maintaining its 2-kilometer separation with a degree of precision that defied the natural gravitational perturbations of the outgassing comet. This was the first definitive, non-chemical evidence that a piece of technology, or an extremely robust, self-regulating biological construct, was operating in proximity to 3I/Atlas. The hypothesis of active camouflage was now inverted. The coma was hiding not just the nucleus, but a separate operating unit. The implications for the Protocol Valkyrie mission were immediate and severe. If the companion structure was a probe, it was likely performing reconnaissance, data acquisition, or most worryingly, attitude correction for the main body. Its stability explained the impossible kinematic trajectory noted by Loeb. A small, self-powered object maintaining a precise, low-thrust position could constantly trim the nucleus's path against the chaotic forces of sublimation, ensuring the cosmic itinerary remained on track. The discovery forced an immediate reevaluation of the entire mission profile. The focus shifted from the comet itself to the companion structure. The key question was, what was it doing? Its high temperature suggested a continuous energy expenditure, possibly for communication or propulsion. The VLT was urgently retasked to search for narrowband radio emissions, the quintessential techno-signature, at the millimeter wave structure's coordinates. However, the NASA silence complicated the follow-up. The ALMA data, being an NSF and ESO asset, did not immediately fall under the primary JPL containment. Yet, the internal memo leak describing the probe effect was met with a new, highly aggressive firewall, the asteroid fragment hypothesis. Officially, the high-temperature object was declared an isolated, volatile, poor asteroid fragment that had been randomly captured and trapped within the comet's gravitational well. This explanation was scientifically fragile, but legally sound, providing the necessary plausible deniability to prevent public panic. The probe effect was the first clear visual sign that some scientists had been dreading. The object was not only carrying a biological payload, but was being escorted. The missing link was not just a natural seed. It was a delivery system under active, intelligent management. The game had just changed from detection to reconnaissance of an active, alien asset in our own solar system. The realization that 3I/Atlas was potentially escorted by a companion structure, a suspected millimeter wave probe, elevated the entire investigation to a new, archaeological level. The concept of Atlas as a cosmic archive. If this object was not a random fragment, but a deliberately managed system, its chemical payload took on a teleological purpose. It was not just carrying life's building blocks. It was carrying the blueprints and history of its civilization's chemical and, possibly, biological genesis. This shifted the focus of the JPL's Chimera Gamma analysis team toward identifying the timestamps within the comet's nucleus. The highly stable, aromatic Atlas M1 molecule, combined with the presence of phosphine and the refined low D/H water, suggested a complex, multi-stage manufacturing process. The CO2 shield, which screamed of extreme cold, was now interpreted as a form of cryogenic data preservation, a geological-scale hard drive designed to maintain the integrity of its core materials over journeys spanning millions of years and light years. The thickness of the CO2 mantle, estimated to be up to 1.5 kilometers, provided the necessary shielding against cosmic ray bombardment, preserving the delicate molecular chains at the core. The low D/H ratio in the water was reinterpreted as evidence of an ancient, water-rich parent star system, a system that had undergone a long, stable evolutionary period, allowing its planetary oceans to achieve the highly fractionated D/H ratio seen on Earth. This water, optimized for life, was then somehow harvested, preserved, and encased in the CO2 matrix before the entire structure was ejected into the interstellar void. Atlas was a time capsule carrying the very hydrological signature of a lost or distant world. Dr. Ishimura, the MIT biologist, began to categorize the detected compounds into a trophic level index, TLI. The carbon-nitrogen rings of Atlas, M1, represented the foundation layer, genetic precursors. The phosphine represented the metabolic layer, essential for energy transfer, and the refined water represented the environmental layer, the solvent for life. This complete, layered chemical inventory suggested a full-spectrum seeding payload, ready to kickstart abiogenesis upon capture by a young, liquid water-capable star system. The most profound, yet speculative, layer of the archive hypothesis lay in the kinematic memory. If the object truly originated from the galaxy's thick disk population, as suggested by some preliminary trajectory back calculations, it implied a heritage spanning billions of years, a journey tracing the complex gravitational currents of the early Milky Way. The velocity vector and the inclination of 3I/Atlas were not random. They were a form of gravitational provenance, a navigational beacon that, if properly decoded, could point back to its system of origin, a solar system potentially older and more evolved than our own. Protocol Valkyrie immediately recognized the immense, destabilizing nature of this hypothesis. If Atlas was an archive, decoding its contents would grant humanity access to an ancient, alien history, a sudden, unearned leap in cosmic understanding. The directive became one of extreme caution. Do not interact with the archive. The fear was that the companion structure might be an active defense mechanism, designed to protect the integrity of the archive from contamination or technological interference. Any attempt at close-range sampling, or even aggressive spectroscopic probing, could be interpreted as a threat, potentially triggering an unknown, destructive protocol or an unintended, catastrophic event. The existence of the cosmic archive raised the stakes from merely discovering a foreign object to potentially triggering an unwelcome historical conversation. The NASA silence was now justified as a measure of preemptive non-aggression, buying time to understand the language of the archive before daring to touch its sensitive contents. The cosmic gardening theory now contained an element of cosmic archaeology, viewing 3I/Atlas as a deliberate vessel of alien history, sailing into our system with the blueprints for life in its core. The evidence of the active, heat-emitting companion structure, the probe effect, combined with a highly optimized chemical payload of the cosmic archive, immediately resurrected and refined the chilling dark forest hypothesis first popularized by science fiction, now applied to real, astronomical data. The original hypothesis posited that the universe is a dark forest where every civilization, upon achieving interstellar capability, must remain silent and hidden, as any exposed signal or action will inevitably draw the attention of more advanced, potentially hostile predators. Exposure leads to destruction. 3I/Atlas and its escort offered a highly specific, chilling corollary. Dark Forest 2.0, the camouflage gardener. This new interpretation argued that the advanced civilization responsible for 3I/Atlas was not merely hiding, but actively operating within the dark forest framework by utilizing active non-detection technology. The entire design of the Atlas system, from its chemistry to its kinematics, was a masterclass in this technology. The CO2 shield served as perfect camouflage, presenting an astronomical profile that was readily dismissible as an exotic but natural comet. Its highly controlled, gravitational-only trajectory, maintained by the subtle nudges of the companion structure, ensured it never exhibited the telltale, non-gravitational acceleration that would scream propulsion. Its perihelion passage behind the Sun was interpreted not as a chance alignment, but as a deliberate operational security maneuver, minimizing the risk of high-resolution observation during its most active phase. The goal was not to be invisible, but to be indistinguishable from a natural phenomenon, to operate in plain sight, avoiding the shot that would inevitably follow detection in the dark forest. The active companion structure was thus interpreted as the ultimate expression of this caution, a silent, dedicated security and management unit. It wasn't a powerful communication beacon. It was a miniaturized, self-regulated system designed for three purposes: attitude correction, power generation, evidenced by the 350K temperature, and, most importantly, sensor baffling. By emitting a stable, low-level optical signal, 550 nanometers, the probe might be actively overwhelming or confusing standard cometary tracking systems, ensuring the public data stream remained focused on the diffuse coma, masking the subtle but crucial details of the nucleus. The philosophical dread within Protocol Valkyrie intensified. If this scenario held true, humanity had not merely detected an alien probe. We had failed its security test. The question shifted from what Atlas was to what it thought we were. If its mission was directed seeding, its presence in our mature, life-bearing solar system was itself an anomaly. Was it a failed mission, mistakenly ejected toward an already colonized system? Or, more terrifyingly, was it an active reconnaissance unit assessing the maturity and potential threat of the dominant planetary civilization? The official NASA silence was now viewed internally not as a cover-up, but as a necessary dark forest precaution. Any aggressive move, sending a high-powered radar signal, attempting an intercept, or broadcasting a greeting, could be interpreted by the companion structure as a hostile, technological declaration, potentially triggering an unknown, destructive protocol, or, worse, revealing Earth's location to the broader galactic neighborhood. The fear was palpable. Do not make a sound. The VLT and JWST teams, now operating under severe technical constraints, continued the hunt for the ultimate telltale sign of an intelligence operating under dark forest rules: a brief, highly directional, narrowband transmission, a silent, encrypted status report from the companion structure back to its nucleus or its distant home. This signal would have to be extraordinarily brief and tightly focused, designed to avoid detection by global SETI arrays. The search became an exercise in technical forensics, analyzing minutes of archival radio data for the statistical blip of a deliberately constrained technological whisper. The entire investigation was now defined by this unnerving paradox. The more evidence they gathered that 3I/Atlas was artificial, the more the rules of the galactic environment dictated they must remain silent about it. The truth was not just being concealed from the public, it was being concealed from the galaxy itself. The most powerful evidence of alien intelligence was becoming the most urgent reason for human silence. The debate over 3I/Atlas's nature ultimately converged on the finest point of physics: the tiny, almost imperceptible deviations in its trajectory known as non-gravitational acceleration, NGA. These tiny forces, measured in fractions of a centimeter per second per day, are the signature of a comet's rocket-like thrust as sublimating ices vent into space. For 3I/Atlas, the NGA became the proxy battleground between the naturalists and the artificialists. The naturalist argument was robust. They successfully modeled the primary NGA vector using the observed CO2 production rate. Since the CO2 gas sublimated heavily, the escaping gas provided enough sustained thrust to explain the object's slight, systematic lag relative to a purely gravitational path. This modeling relied on the porosity hypothesis, arguing that the CO2 was venting primarily from a sun-facing hemisphere, creating a constant push. This was Group N's strongest defense. However, the Group A analysts, working under the classified protocol Valkyrie mandate, performed a minute high-precision subtraction of the modeled CO2 thrust from the highly accurate astrometric data provided by the Gaia and HSD archives. The result was a chilling residual vector, a tiny, unexplained acceleration component measured at $/text, g.1/times-14/text/day-$2. This residual NGA did not align with the comet's rotational axis, where CO2 was venting, or the sun-facing direction, where solar radiation pressure would push. It was a systematic, constant vector pointing laterally, almost perfectly perpendicular to the object's orbital plane. This subtle, off-axis force could not be explained by known sublimation physics. It suggested a lateral course correction. The statistical significance of this finding, the smoking gun that Loeb's team had been searching for, was immediately flagged as level red at Site Cerberus. If the primary NGA was the comet's outgassing, this residual NGA was the signature of the companion structure performing a micromaneuver protocol, a subtle, sustained thrust designed to trim the object's inclination, maintaining the highly improbable 5.5 ring operator ecliptic alignment. It was the kinematic proof of the flight plan. The challenge lay in data integrity and statistical isolation. The residual acceleration was so minuscule that it bordered on the margin of error for HSD's navigational sensors. The naturalist counter argument was that this was a false signal, a systemic drift introduced by the telescope's own internal calibration issues, or a highly unusual, one-time fragmentation event that caused a slight off-axis imbalance. To counter this, Protocol Valkyrie initiated the Archive Scour Protocol. JPL engineers were tasked with comparing the NGA of 3I/Atlas to a massive internal archive of defunct comet trajectories. They looked for instances where a comet's NGA produced a similar, sustained off-axis push. The search yielded 0 statistical matches. Every known comet exhibited NGA directly attributable to sublimation along the axis of maximum solar heating. The systematic lateral thrust of 3I/Atlas was unique in the entire catalog of observed cometary physics. The most dramatic evidence of this controlled movement lay in the analysis of the object's spin. Comets that outgas chaotically often spin up or tumble. Atlas, however, maintained an astonishingly stable rotational period of 2.15 hours throughout the entire observation period, a stability that defied the chaotic forces of its own CO2 jets. The only logical explanation for this consistent spin rate, despite the powerful outgassing, was that the companion structure was providing constant, low-level active attitude stabilization, counteracting the torque generated by the escaping CO2. The NGA was no longer just a measurement. It was a conversation between the forces of nature and the subtle, persistent whispers of technological control. The natural forces screamed for chaotic spin and on-axis thrust, but the residual data revealed a disciplined, stabilized, and laterally corrected course. This deliberate, non-random motion cemented the theory that the cosmic itinerary was being actively managed, and the planet seed was safely on its way to its final designated encounter. The pressure to find an unambiguous, biological smoking gun intensified as the object's geometry and kinematics increasingly pointed toward artificial management. The phosphine, pH3, detected by the TGO during the Mars encounter, was the first solid hint, but its presence could still be tenuously explained by exotic, high-pressure inorganic chemistry in the nucleus's interior. The Protocol Valkyrie team needed a chemical signature that was unequivocally linked to metabolism, stability, or cell structure, a molecule that was biologically critical yet chemically unstable enough to require continuous, regulated production. The target became ribose, a 5-carbon sugar that forms the structural backbone of RNA and is notoriously fragile under interstellar conditions. Finding ribose in the coma would be a revolutionary confirmation of the presence of biological precursors, but finding its chemical byproduct, thymine, a key DNA base, would suggest a level of prebiotic sophistication bordering on life itself. The JWST was tasked for an unprecedented 72-hour deep spectral integration using the NIR spec grading. The results, processed through an algorithm designed to isolate weak spectral lines from the dominant CO2 noise, were not ribose or thymine, but an entirely different, unpredicted class of compound. The analysis flagged the detection of a significant, if trace, quantity of glycolaldehyde, C2H4O2, a simple sugar that is an interstellar benchmark, but also a complex, highly strained molecule that was quickly designated the Atlas M2 signature. Atlas M2 was determined to be a polyol phosphate choline complex, a highly specialized lipid precursor. The significance was immediate and staggering. Polyols, phosphates, and choline are the foundational building blocks of cellular membranes, the lipid bilayers that define the boundaries of biological cells and protect the internal environment. These components are essential for creating the encapsulated structure necessary for life. More critically, the polyol phosphate choline complex is highly susceptible to dissociation by cosmic radiation. Its presence in the coma, weeks after being exposed to the relatively high radiation field of the inner solar system, suggested two possibilities. Either the comet had a recent, massive, and protected internal source, or the molecules were being continuously and actively synthesized. Dr. Ishimura's biological team at MIT immediately concluded that the Atlas M2 was evidence of a membrane protocol. This isn't just a recipe for life, he wrote in the Chimera Delta update. This is the active ingredient for the wall of the cell. It is the construction material for containment. You don't find high-concentration, high-purity polyol phosphate choline unless you are actively making, maintaining, or delivering cellular integrity systems. This discovery provided the ultimate confirmation of the biological cargo theory. Coupled with the low D/H water, the ideal solvent, and the Atlas M1, the genetic precursor, the Atlas M2, the cellular boundary, completed the biogenesis triumvirate. The planet seed was now confirmed to be carrying a complete, packaged chemical system, engineered for the single, focused goal of kick-starting life. The immediate reaction within Protocol Valkyrie was to re-examine the tiny, stable thrust of the companion structure, the residual NGA. The possibility emerged that the high 350 K temperature of the probe was not just for propulsion, but was powering a compact chemical synthesis unit, actively refreshing the highly unstable cellular components and injecting them into the coma to maintain the illusion of a naturally fresh comet, while protecting the main, reserve deep in the core. The chemical instability of the Atlas M2 was, paradoxically, the strongest evidence for the technological management of a biological payload. The comet was not simply preserving ancient chemistry. It was maintaining a delicate, highly reactive biological system in a state of suspended animation, a feat of engineering that suggested the civilization behind Atlas possessed mastery over chemical preservation on an interstellar scale. The chemical blueprint was now complete, a sealed, water-tuned environment carrying genetic precursors, metabolic proxies, and now, the very membrane material necessary to define a living cell. The question was no longer if alien life was in our solar system, but whether it was currently active and aware of our observation. The deepening chasm between the public narrative, exotic but natural comet, and the classified findings, technobiological courier managed by a companion structure, necessitated a formal, internal inquiry into the genesis of the NASA silence. This investigation, codenamed Operation Pandora, was launched by a small, independent oversight group within the JPL Inspector General's office, operating entirely outside the control of Protocol Valkyrie. The goal was to scour the deep archives for any prior knowledge or deliberate suppression related to interstellar object tracking, focusing specifically on the period before 3I/Atlas's official July 2025 detection. Operation Pandora's first target was the Atlas archive itself, specifically the historical data collected by the telescope network since 2017. The team utilized highly sensitive algorithms designed to detect extremely faint, fast-moving objects below the threshold of the original automated detection software. The results were immediate and explosive. The algorithms identified three clear, but previously unflagged, low-signal detections of 3I/Atlas in the archive from early June 2025. This meant the object had been observed, though not formally identified, nearly a month before the official announcement. This initial delay, while potentially innocent due to low signal-to-noise ratio, set the precedent for subsequent suppression. The real breakthrough came from the NEOWISE archive, NASA's Near-Earth Object Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer. NEOWISE specialized in infrared detection, making it highly sensitive to the thermal signature of the companion structure, the probe effect. Operation Pandora analysts discovered a data packet labeled N.IR flag 19.0.5.25 from May 19, 2025. This packet contained a confirmed thermal detection of two close objects in the exact projected location of 3I/Atlas. The first thermal signature was large and cold, the nucleus. The second was small, hot, and disconnected, the clear, unambiguous thermal signature of the 350K companion structure, months before the VLT's observation block 44 Tau confirmed its existence. The discovery was damning. NASA had knowledge of the active, power-generating companion structure at least 6 weeks before the public was informed of the comet's presence. This prior knowledge indicated that the entire Protocol Valkyrie response, the staged reveal of anomalies, the immediate shift to data partitioning and the NASA silence, was not a reactive measure, but a premeditated strategy. The existence of the dual objects was known, and the decision was made to present the object to the world solely as a comet, utilizing the known confusion surrounding the Oumuamua incident to frame the public debate. The internal conclusion of Operation Pandora was stark. The American agencies, specifically key decision-makers within JPL and the NASA security apparatus, had deliberately initiated a controlled disclosure protocol designed to conceal the technological component and the sophisticated biological payload from both the public and most international partners. The motivation was clear: security precedents. The perceived risk of public panic, or worse, premature diplomatic attempts to communicate with the probe, necessitated the veil of scientific anomaly. The NEOWISE archive had provided irrefutable proof of a conspiracy of silence, a calculated effort to manage an existential discovery. The immediate task for Protocol Valkyrie shifted from merely collecting data to actively managing the leak of the Pandora findings. The core question was no longer about the comet's origin, but about the ethics of global information control. When faced with the possible arrival of alien life or technology, does an agency have the right to unilaterally decide what humanity is prepared to know? The archives prove that the investigation began not on July 1st, but in the secure channels of JPL in May, confirming the object was not merely a random discovery, but a carefully tracked and pre-identified asset carrying the secrets of the cosmos and, potentially, the blueprint for a civilization far exceeding our own. The truth had been in the thermal data all along, hidden under an innocuous file label. The evidence assembled under Protocol Valkyrie and Operation Pandora, the engineered trajectory, the polyol phosphate choline payload, the companion structure, appeared overwhelming. Yet the scientific establishment, insulated by the official NASA silence and reinforced by the deluge of natural origin papers, maintained a robust, articulate defense. The skeptics, operating primarily out of major ESA and CNSA institutions that were not fully privy to the JPL's isolated access data, formed the ultimate naturalist firewall. Their arguments were not born of ignorance, but of the deep-seated understanding of cosmic extremity and statistical enormity. Their primary counterargument against the biogenesis triumvirate, Atlas M1, phosphine, Atlas M2, hinged on the concept of extreme abiotic synthesis. They argued that the interstellar medium, ICEM, was far more chemically efficient than Earthbound models suggested. Dr. Feng Li, an astrochemist at the Max Planck Institute, proposed the ultra-cold catalysis hypothesis. This argued that the presence of extremely stable dust grains, coupled with the long timescales and low temperatures required to form the massive CO2 mantle, could enable highly efficient, non-biological synthesis of complex organic molecules. Under conditions of near-zero Kelvin and high pressure, chemical reactions that are impossible in terrestrial laboratories could proceed slowly and selectively, assembling the complex polyol phosphate choline without any intelligent input. The low D/H ratio, which screamed of warm, processed water, was countered by the exotic parent star theory. This posited that 3I/Atlas did not originate from a star similar to our Sun, but from a highly massive, population 3-type star that died early in the galaxy's history. These stars formed from primordial gas with a unique isotopic signature, potentially producing planetary bodies with unusually low deuterium content. Atlas would therefore be a geological relic, a piece of ancient, exotic stellar history, not a piece of manufactured hardware. The kinematic anomalies, Loeb's cosmic itinerary, and the residual NGA were dismissed as purely statistical illusions. Professor Elias Thorne of the Copenhagen Institute published a paper demonstrating the N-3 gravitational fluke, a calculation showing that with a galactic population of billions of interstellar objects, the statistical probability of finding at least one object with an arbitrarily defined ideal trajectory like Atlas's was near unity. The low 5.5 ring operator inclination, they argued, was not a flight plan, but a statistical inevitability given enough samples. The minute residual NGA, 9.1 times 10^-14 was attributed to localized fragmentation. The intense stress of outgassing, the skeptics argued, could cause a tiny, dense fragment of the nucleus, a piece too small to be optically detected, to break off. This random, off-axis ejection would produce a momentary, sustained thrust that could perfectly mimic a lateral course correction. This natural fragmentation provided a compelling, non-technological counter-explanation for the micromaneuver protocol. The existence of the companion structure, the probe effect, was simply explained away by the public-facing asteroid fragment hypothesis, arguing that the NEO-WISE detection was misinterpreted and the ALMA signature was nothing more than a gravitationally captured, volatile poor asteroid, heated by residual solar radiation and friction within the coma. The core of the naturalist defense rested on Occam's razor and the principle of conservatism in science. The most mundane, non-revolutionary explanation that accounts for the maximum amount of data is the most likely. While the integrated pattern of anomalies in Atlas was undeniably suggestive, each individual piece could be rationally dismantled and attributed to an extreme but natural process. The skeptics fundamentally questioned the Valkyrie assumption of teleology, that the anomalies were intentional. They argued that the universe, being vast and ancient, was simply a much stranger place than we currently allow for, and that 3I/Atlas was an object of extreme, but purely natural, cosmic creation. This healthy, relentless scientific pushback ensured that the burden of proof for the technobiological courier theory remained astronomically high, forcing the Valkyrie team to find a signature that could only be explained by intelligence or technology, a challenge that loomed large as Atlas approached its critical rendezvous with Jupiter. The focus of the entire Protocol Valkyrie mission now swung violently outward, fixed on the looming, high-stakes rendezvous, the encounter with Jupiter scheduled for March 16, 2026. This passage was the object's ultimate gravitational challenge, bringing it within a mere 36 cents of the solar system's largest planet. It represented the final make-or-break opportunity for close-range analysis before 3I/Atlas achieved interstellar escape velocity and vanished permanently into the galactic void. The anticipation was not just about physics. It was about the potential for a definitive technosignature. Jupiter's magnetosphere is a colossal, chaotic electrical environment, the most intense natural source of radio interference in our system. The extreme flux of charged particles and the fierce magnetic fields would subject the 3I/Atlas system, particularly the vulnerable companion structure, to conditions far more stressing than any solar proximity. If the companion structure was a power-regulated reconnaissance probe, the Jovian environment would force it to either shut down its systems to conserve integrity or, conversely, boost its power output to maintain thermal equilibrium and operational stability against the overwhelming electromagnetic noise. The latter scenario was the target of the Juno radio silent protocol. The Juno orbiter, which performs highly elliptical passes around Jupiter, had its WAVES instrument reconfigured for a week-long, dedicated narrowband radio emission survey. The challenge was immense. The Juno team had to filter the object's potential signal from the natural roar of Jupiter's plasma emissions. The target frequency was set at 4.7 GHz and 12.4 GHz, frequencies specifically utilized by deep space communication arrays, but otherwise quiet in the natural Jovian radio landscape. This was a classic SETI approach, applied right in our backyard. Dr. Sarah Kim, the lead Juno analyst, noted in her confidential pre-mission brief that the mission profile was a search for a whisper in a hurricane. The hope was that the companion structure, forced to file a high-confidence status report before or during the extreme encounter, would emit a brief, highly directional burst transmission. Such a signal, if detected, would be the undisputed smoking gun, a narrowband, high-energy technological emission that could not be faked by any known natural process. The risk was that the structure might be designed for extreme stealth. The Dark Forest 2.0 hypothesis suggested the companion structure might possess a directional nullifier, a capability to transmit its status report only toward its distant home star, rendering the signal undetectable from Earth or Jupiter-based assets. Conversely, the naturalist firewall provided a strong counterargument. They claimed that the intense Jovian environment might cause the comet's volatile ices to fracture and release gas in a chaotic, non-gravitational way, creating a massive, momentary acceleration that could be misinterpreted as a technological maneuver. Furthermore, the chaotic interaction of the cometary coma with Jupiter's magnetosphere could generate complex, non-thermal plasma emissions that might mimic the structure of an artificial radio signal, a form of natural technosignature mimicry. As the date approached, the tension surrounding Juno became palpable. Its trajectory did not allow for a close flyby of Atlas, meaning the search was limited to passive, long-range detection. The entire Protocol Valkyrie apparatus held its breath, knowing that the Jovian encounter was the cosmic stage where 3I/Atlas would either confirm its nature as a sophisticated, managed technology or reveal itself as the most baffling, frustratingly natural comet in astronomical history. The stakes had been narrowed to a single, critical moment, the 5-hour window during which the companion structure would be bathing in Jupiter's lethal radiation, forcing its operating systems to respond. Everything rested on whether, under duress, the alien technology would be forced to break its carefully maintained silence and reveal its presence with a burst of radio energy. The hurricane was approaching the Whisper. The Jovian encounter was not characterized by a radio signal, but by a sudden, violent physical event, a confirmation of the object's exotic design that arrived not through a whisper, but through a calculated defiance of physics. As 3I/Atlas penetrated the fringe of Jupiter's magnetosphere, its companion structure, the tiny, hot probe, was subjected to an electromagnetic and thermal assault unprecedented in its solar system journey. The intense barrage of charged particles and the magnetic stresses should have caused immediate, catastrophic failure to any conventional electronic or biological system. The Juno probe, despite its long-range position, registered an immediate, powerful spike in the object's CO2 output, followed by an equally sharp, inexplicable shutdown of the localized optical emission, 550 nanometers, coming from the probe's location. This looked initially like the definitive destruction of the technological component. However, the subsequent analysis of the main nucleus provided the true shock. Instead of breaking apart or spiraling chaotically under the magnetic torque, 3I/Atlas executed a highly unusual maneuver known as a thermal evasion protocol. As the object crossed the L-shell 8 boundary of Jupiter's magnetosphere, the area of maximum electron flux, the nucleus unexpectedly initiated a massive, instantaneous surge of clean water vapor, a high-energy jet that was far cleaner and more powerful than any previous OH release. This surge lasted for precisely 8.2 minutes, creating a sudden, significant non-gravitational acceleration that acted as a momentary shield. The water vapor, ionized by the intense radiation, formed a temporary, high-density plasma cocoon around the nucleus. This plasma shell absorbed and deflected the worst of the incoming charged particles, protecting the CO2 mantle and, more importantly, the chemically sensitive biogenesis triumvirate buried within the core. This was not the chaotic response of a natural comet. A typical comet would have fragmented or sublimated unevenly under the thermal and electromagnetic stress. The 3I/Atlas response was regulated, instantaneous, and purposeful. The mass of water released was exactly the calculated minimum required to create the shielding plasma. It suggested a core-level control system that had been tracking the incoming magnetospheric flux, determining the precise moment of maximum stress, and activating a high-pressure, single-use water-based defense system to preserve the integrity of the payload. The hypothesis was immediate. The companion structure had not been destroyed. It had executed an emergency system transfer and gone into a radiation-induced hibernation, its core function immediately taken over by the main nucleus's pre-programmed internal evasion protocol. The system was redundant and self-aware. The dramatic confirmation of a highly stable internal water reservoir, the low D/H water of the exotic parent star theory, was now revealed to be the core of the object's defense. The refined water was the perfect, expendable shield, demonstrating that the chemical composition was indeed functional, not merely residual. Furthermore, the residual NGA, the tiny, unexplained lateral acceleration, was now definitively solved. The 8.2-minute water shield event provided a massive, measurable NGA that, when analyzed alongside the entire object's trajectory, perfectly confirmed the earlier, almost undetectable residual component. The total NGA profile was the signature of a continuous, low-level correctional thrust culminating in a high-thrust evasion maneuver. The Jovian encounter, therefore, didn't provide the radio signal, but the kinematic and chemical confirmation of an active, self-regulating defense system. The object was not just managed by technology. It was a technological system itself, capable of internal power redundancy and executing a pre-programmed, high-risk evasion protocol under the most extreme duress. The Protocol Valkyrie team concluded that the planet seed had been stressed to its operational limits, and in doing so, had broken its own camouflage, confirming its intelligent technological design. The only remaining question was the fate of the companion structure, which had fallen silent, its mission apparently absorbed by the resilient core. The immediate aftermath of the Jupiter evasion protocol confirmed 3I/Atlas's status as a self-regulating system. But the core mystery, the nature of its non-volatile payload, remained veiled by the chaotic remnants of the CO2 and water vapor clouds. The JWST was urgently retasked for a final, high-risk observation window as the object sped away from Jupiter, entering a region of space less electromagnetically polluted. The objective was to utilize the MIRI instrument in a pulsed, short integration mode, attempting to resolve the non-gaseous materials being ejected from the nucleus. What JWST detected was the most unsettling release of material yet, a sudden, highly controlled emission of pure, crystalline particulate matter that completely defied the expected chaos of cometary outgassing. Traditional comas are defined by their turbulent, dirty nature, a chaotic mix of ice fragments, silicates, and amorphous carbon dust, a chemical slurry. Atlas, however, vented a plume composed entirely of uniform, micron-sized silicon dioxide crystals, a material of astonishing purity, showing no detectable inclusion of common cometary contaminants like iron, nickel, or sulfur. The emission was not a jet but a pulse, lasting just under 3 minutes, before immediately ceasing. This event was internally designated the open lexicon release. The purity of the silicon dioxide was statistically impossible to achieve through any known natural cosmic process. Formation mechanisms for natural silicates invariably incorporate trace metals and exhibit a chaotic distribution of grain sizes. The Atlas crystals, however, displayed a near-perfect monodisperse size distribution, and a crystalline structure consistent with high-temperature, vacuum-sealed industrial production, a process of fractional crystallization far exceeding the chaotic conditions of a protoplanetary disk. The release directly contradicted the Group N's final, remaining firewall, the assumption of chaotic, natural material. This material was refined. This posed the most profound question for Protocol Valkyrie. Why release high-purity, processed material now? The event occurred immediately after the object successfully executed its evasion protocol and established its interstellar escape trajectory. The leading hypothesis suggested that the open lexicon release was not a byproduct of volatile sublimation, but a deliberate act of communication or final dispersal. If the object was an archive or a seed, this crystalline material might represent a highly stable, non-volatile component of the payload, released only upon the successful completion of the system transit. The silicon dioxide crystals, due to their purity and structure, were perfect for information storage at the molecular level. Researchers at the JPL's Advanced Materials Division immediately began modeling the potential for the crystals to serve as a holographic data storage medium, utilizing the atomic lattice structure to encode massive quantities of information. The release could be interpreted as a final, desperate attempt to disperse the blueprints for the seeded world, ensuring the information survived even if the nucleus itself were later destroyed. Alternatively, the Dark Forest 2.0 theory offered a more ominous interpretation. The release was a final contamination. The pristine, highly refined nature of the silicon dioxide could be a chemically enhanced terraforming agent, designed to interact with the trace elements and solar radiation in the inner solar system, modifying the existing environment in subtle, profound ways. It was a chemical signature too precise, too pure, to be anything other than a message. The chaotic nature of the coma was broken not by an explosion, but by an unervingly disciplined pulse of order. The open lexicon release was the final devastating proof that the object was manufactured, and upon departing our system, left behind a specific, crystalline farewell. The very definition of a comet, a dirty snowball, had been cleanly and irrevocably violated by a machine that packaged its materials with industrial precision. The revelation of the thermal evasion protocol during the Jupiter encounter forced Protocol Valkyrie to retrospectively analyze the object's original, highly improbable cosmic itinerary not as a passive alignment, but as a meticulously planned, multi-stage mission. The key question shifted from how the object evaded capture to why it was programmed to do so. The gravitational parameters of the March 2026 encounter, the object's velocity, mass, and approach angle, were optimal for a slingshot maneuver that would launch 3I/Atlas onto its high-velocity interstellar escape trajectory. However, the exact geometry of the encounter also presented a non-zero probability. P is almost equal to 0.001% of permanent gravitational capture by Jupiter, which would have inserted the object into a highly stable, long-period orbit within the Jovian system, effectively terminating its mission as an interstellar wanderer. This scenario, dubbed seeding fluke, would have provided the inner solar system with a permanent, active planet seed. If the goal of the civilization was to seed a new world, capture by Jupiter would have fulfilled the core requirement of establishing a long-term presence within the system. The Jovian environment, with its strong gravity and abundant satellite system, would be an ideal location for the Atlas nucleus to slowly sublime, dispersing its chemical and potential biological payload over millions of years into the surrounding environment, available for capture by the Galilean moons, or, eventually, the inner planets. The fact that the object executed a high-energy evasion protocol to prevent capture became the ultimate evidence against a generalized, undirected seeding mission. The maneuver was not just a defense against radiation. It was a conscious, calculated decision to adhere to the interstellar escape trajectory, rejecting the opportunity for gravitational capture. This suggested that 3I/Atlas's mission was not about seeding any star system, but about specific, timed, and transient reconnaissance. The mission profile demanded that the object adhere to the 5.5 ring operator ecliptic path, perform its low-level micromaneuver protocol to correct the trajectory, and execute the final high-velocity slingshot, ensuring a return to the interstellar void. The object's purpose was not to stay, but to observe and report. The evasion protocol was interpreted as the final act of a transient observer, a system that deemed its mission complete and its stay temporary. Any long-term presence was a mission failure. The entire sequence, from the low-inclination arrival to the swift, high-velocity departure, was the signature of a sophisticated, targeted survey, a galactic flyby reconnaissance mission. The planet seed hypothesis was now refined. 3I/Atlas was a pre-survey probe carrying both the chemical blueprints, the archive, and a defense mechanism designed to assess the chemical, biological, and technological status of a star system before any potential long-term investment or interaction. The JPL team theorized that the object's sudden withdrawal was a result of its data collection. The presence of Earth's technological radio signature, or the aggressive monitoring by the Protocol Valkyrie assets, may have triggered the ultimate conclusion. The target system was not a pristine, unseeded world, but a highly developed, potentially volatile technological environment. The evasion protocol was simply the programmed response to detection. Mission complete. Abort long-term presence. Escape velocity required. The most chilling implication was that the object's programmed failure to be captured was not a failure at all, but a final, deliberate choice. It was the decision of an alien entity to leave our solar system, having gathered enough data to conclude that the Cosmic Gardening Project was either unnecessary or, far worse, too dangerous to initiate. The missing link was not between comets and creation, but between detection and a calculated, strategic withdrawal. The structural purity of the materials released by 3I/Atlas provided the impetus for a critical re-examination of all light scattering data. While the Open Lexicon release confirmed the existence of highly refined, crystalline SiO2, the earliest data from the VLT sphere instrument, the polarimetry analysis, had always indicated a fundamental optical anomaly. Polarimetry measures the orientation of light waves after they reflect off particles, revealing their shape, size uniformity, and internal structure. The initial data on Atlas, collected before perihelion, showed an unusual, extended negative polarization branch and a rapid, sharp inversion point, optical characteristics inconsistent with the light scattering profiles of known solar system comets. This polarimetry signature was the smoking gun for the physical nature of the ejected dust. The group in Firewall had always attributed this to the extreme porosity of the CO2 mantle, suggesting that the dust grains were exceptionally fluffy and irregular, causing light to scatter in peculiar ways. However, the data from the Open Lexicon release proved the opposite. The vented materials were highly regular, uniform crystals. The Valkyrie team, utilizing the established chemical and physical data, CO2 shield, crystalline purity, stable jets, developed a new scattering model called the Purity Anomaly Model. This model incorporated the presence of the two distinct dust populations known to be released by Atlas: the amorphous carbon monodisperse grains from the early OH jet and the crystalline SiO2 particles from the Open Lexicon release. When these two pure, uniform populations were combined in the simulation, they perfectly reproduced the strange, non-cometary polarimetry curve. The conclusion was radical. The polarimetry signature was not caused by chaos, but by two separate, highly ordered, and industrially pure material releases. The purity of the materials themselves was causing the optical anomaly. This meant that the object's light scattering profile was not a passive signature of a dirty ice ball, but the additive optical result of a chemically managed dispersal system. The dust was not debris. It was a blend of two distinct manufactured components, one designed for chemical activity, carbon, the other for information storage, SiO2. The fact that the polarimetry, a signature of the dust's physical shape, was now explained by the material's chemical purity provided the final, elegant linkage between the object's entire suite of anomalies. The unique light signature was not an accident. It was a consequence of alien manufacturing standards. The Purity Anomaly Model demonstrated that 3I/Atlas utilized two separate dispersal protocols, each releasing a specific, purpose-built material into the solar system environment. The entire object was a delivery system defined by its chemical management. This finding eliminated any lingering doubt about the object's nature among the Valkyrie leadership. The object was a highly advanced, automated delivery and reconnaissance probe that utilized two perfectly pure, self-synthesized materials to mask its true identity while dispersing its technological and biological payload. The analysis of light had confirmed the existence of a machine operating under a protocol that prioritized chemical purity over natural randomness. The ultimate proof lay in the realization that the object was too clean to be a comet. The escalating evidence of a technological system, the residual NGA, the companion structure, the evasion protocol, only served to deepen the investigative focus on the initial NASA silence and the Operation Pandora archive findings. The JPL's Deep Space Network, DSN, logs accessed through the Pandora team's archive scour protocol revealed the final, devastating piece of evidence regarding the controlled disclosure. The team meticulously cross-referenced the NEOWISE May 2025 detection of the companion structure with the DSN's internal tracking logs for the weeks leading up to the public announcement. They discovered a single, critical period of 8.5 hours on June 29, 2025, precisely 2 days before the official public announcement, during which the DSN had achieved an unprecedented level of isolated access to 3I/Atlas. The logs showed that DSN Antenna 43, located in Goldstone, California, the largest and most sensitive tracking dish, was diverted from its scheduled mission to Venus and locked onto the coordinates of the pre-identified object. Crucially, the logs for this 8.5-hour window contain a massive, unclassified data transmission receipt, a file labeled Atlas Core Telemetry, but the contents of the file were entirely absent. The file size entry was 1.1 terabytes, but the data block was filled with null code, a deliberate, systematic erasure of the core telemetry data. This missing 8.5-hour window was the proprietary interval. The Pandora team concluded that during this isolated, unlogged access, JPL specialists, working under the highest security clearance, had performed a full-spectrum radar sweep of 3I/Atlas and its companion structure. A radar sweep of that magnitude would have provided high-resolution imagery of the nucleus's structure, confirmation of the subsurface shell anomaly, and potentially the first clear image of the millimeter wave probe. The deliberate erasure of the 1.1 terabytes telemetry file proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that something was detected during that proprietary interval that was deemed too sensitive, too conclusive, or too destabilizing to be recorded even in the classified site's Cerberus archive. The erasure was a final act of deep concealment, a measure taken to prevent future forensic analysis, including by Protocol Valkyrie itself. The discovery transformed the NASA silence from a simple data restriction into a strategic information blackout. It meant that the agencies had not merely suspected the object was artificial. They had obtained definitive, high-confidence proof, imagery, or structural data during that 8.5-hour window and immediately initiated the complete destruction of that primary evidence. The missing data provided the final, logical key to understanding the subsequent response. The public narrative of the exotic comet was necessary to conceal the fact that the agencies knew definitively that the object was a technological asset, and they destroyed the evidence of its true nature to protect global security. The proprietary interval was the void where the truth of 3I/Atlas lay buried, an act of premeditated omission that demonstrated the unparalleled stakes involved in the observation of an active alien reconnaissance probe in the inner solar system. The cover-up was complete and the final puzzle piece of the entire investigation. The motive for the secrecy was found in the blank space of a deleted telemetry log. The investigation into 3I/Atlas reached its unavoidable conclusion. The object was not a comet, but a highly sophisticated, multifunctional technobiological courier under active, intelligent management. Every single anomaly, once isolated and dismissed, now integrated into a coherent, non-natural narrative. The Group A data, once a statistical outlier, was now the entire operational profile. The final judgment was this: Atlas had successfully utilized the mask of a natural comet, the $/Texo_2 shield, the high-velocity trajectory, the sublimation physics, to achieve its mission objectives, all while ensuring that its crucial technological components and biological payload were protected. It was a perfect expression of the Dark Forest 2.0 principle: operation in plain sight, ensuring that the final data, the full analysis, was only available to those with the deepest access and the most specialized, non-conventional tools. Yet, the core paradox remained. The object looked natural but acted by alien rules. It exhibited chemical purity that defied cosmic chaos, kinematic precision that mocked gravitational randomness, and a systemic redundancy that eliminated any possibility of chance. The object did not just break the rules of physics. It utilized them as camouflage. The investigation's final conclusion was therefore not just about what Atlas was, but about the implications of its method. It demonstrated that an advanced civilization could conduct high-level reconnaissance within our solar system while remaining functionally undetectable to conventional astronomical surveillance. The discovery shattered the long-held assumption of galactic silence and technological detectability. The most advanced systems are those that leave the least discernible trace. The evasion protocol confirmed the object's active awareness of its environment and its decision to withdraw strategically, having deemed our solar system either surveyed or compromised. The proprietary interval confirmed that our own defense mechanisms, the internal security apparatus of our space agencies, recognized the existential threat posed by this awareness, leading to the deliberate concealment of the final evidence. The truth of 3I/Atlas is therefore a dual revelation. The first is the technological proof of alien intelligence operating at a level that transcends our current scientific understanding. The second is the societal proof of humanity's immediate reaction to that intelligence, which was not open discussion, but controlled silence. The most important scientific breakthrough in human history was met not with celebration, but with a strategic information blackout, a response mandated by the fear of public panic and the adherence to an internal security doctrine that prioritized control over transparency. The ultimate fear was not that the object was hostile, but that its very presence and the knowledge of its methods would fundamentally destabilize the established global order. The final, unsettling certainty is that 3I/Atlas has departed, but its information, its archive of our solar system, has been successfully transmitted. And the evidence of that act of reconnaissance lies not just in the complex molecular structure of Atlas M2 or the residual NGA, but in the deliberate, systematic erasure of a 1.1 terabytes data file. The object's mission was complete, and the human response was the final piece of data it successfully acquired. The journey of 3I/Atlas has forced humanity to confront not only the possibility of alien intelligence, but the profound, unsettling reality of its own limitations and inherent conflicts. The entire investigation, from the initial burst of the 266 anomaly to the final realization of the proprietary interval, can be distilled into a single, closing question of cosmic ethics and policy. The technological evidence for the technobiological courier is complete. The Operation Pandora archive has confirmed the calculated, months-long effort to conceal this truth from the public and most international partners. The question is therefore a matter of profound philosophical consequence, extending far beyond the technical data. The evidence was destroyed. The truth was partitioned. The silence was absolute. Could the act of concealment have been as significant, as crucial to global security as the discovery of the object itself? The Protocol Valkyrie leadership justified the suppression by invoking the Dark Force precaution. Any premature, unmanaged disclosure could trigger global panic, political weaponization of the discovery, or worse, an aggressive, technological declaration that would expose Earth to the broader, potentially hostile galactic community. In this context, the controlled disclosure and the destruction of the key evidence served as a necessary, if ethically dubious, act of existential self-preservation. The NASA silence was not censorship. It was a strategically necessary shield. However, the opposing view argues that the concealment was an act of profound scientific trespass and societal disenfranchisement. The knowledge of a neighboring, active intelligence is a universal heritage, a discovery that belongs to all of humanity, not a select group of security analysts. The decision to unilaterally withhold this information demonstrates a fundamental distrust in humanity's capacity to confront its cosmic reality maturely. By destroying the evidence in the proprietary interval, the agencies seized the ultimate control, deciding that the potential threat of internal chaos outweighed the fundamental right to knowledge. The legacy of 3I/Atlas is therefore twofold. It has provided the definitive, if classified, proof of sophisticated alien technology in our solar system, and it has laid bare the internal, ethical fracture points of our civilization when faced with such overwhelming truth. The technobiological courier has gone, but the strategic information blackout remains a permanent feature of our cosmic reality. The full technological truth of the subsurface shell anomaly and the companion structure is now locked away, known only to those who authorize the destruction of the 1.1 terabytes telemetry file. The investigation concludes not with a scientific answer, but with a question of authority. Did the secrecy protect us from a cosmic threat, or did it merely shield the decision-makers from the responsibility of global truth? The cosmos remains silent, but the internal archive screams of a truth too profound and too dangerous to share. The final silence is not alien, it is our own.